guys, welcome back to Antler and Bow's YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be doing a tutorial on how to use the Fresh Baked Goods stencil on a roll top bread box. First off, you need your bread box, and also you will need your stencil, paint, a weeding tool or tweezers, a sturdy credit card or a scraper, a towel, scissors for trimming, and of course a paint tray. I'll discuss the paint brushes a little later in the video. You're going to ensure that your surface is dust free, so give it a wipe down. And then you're going to grab your stencil, your scraper or credit card, and you're just going to go over the stencil a few times to ensure good contact with the transfer tape on top of the stencil. Also, here's where you're going to work out any air bubbles that may have cropped up during shipping. You're going to leave the backing on and see if you need to trim off any part of your stencil. I need to do a little trimming to the bottom, so I'm going to grab my scissors and carefully cut along the bottom of the stencil, ensuring that I don't cut into the design. Now that I have my stencil trimmed, I'm going to go over it just a few more times. And then I'm going to separate the backing from the stencil and transfer tape. The easiest way to do this is to actually remove the backing from your stencil. So you'll lay your stencil face down and then peel the backing away gently and slowly to ensure that all your little bits and pieces stay down. So there you have your stencil and your transfer tape. So then we are going to gently position this on the lid of our bread box. And then we're going to grab our scraper and use that to adhere the stencil to the surface of your bread box. You can flip your scraper or credit card on the side and kind of run it down each one of the grooves just to get good contact with the surface of your bread box. You can also use your rag and just kind of really give it a good rub down if you're worried about ripping your stencil. So now I'm going to remove the transfer tape from my stencil. And we're going to do that slowly in case any issues crop up where the little cutouts don't really want to stick down. They want to stick to your transfer tape still. That's not typically an issue I have with my stencils. However, I am using a stencil material that I no longer use with my stencils in my shop. But you just want to continue to work it, pressing down to make sure that if your transfer tape has lifted your stencil off the surface of the bread box, just to kind of lightly tap it back down. And then we're just going to slowly work the transfer tape off of the stencil. As you can see here, I had a little trouble with some of the smaller pieces, not quite wanting to come off of the transfer tape onto the bread box. And when that happened, I just used my weeding tool to place the pieces back onto the bread box from the transfer tape. And you can do the same thing with your tweezers. So now that we have the stencil on the bread box and the transfer tape off, I'm just going to go over a few spots with my scraper just to make sure that it is solidly adhered to the surface of my bread box. I'm also going to press down using my rag just to make sure that all those little pieces are stuck down and not going to lift off while I'm painting. Here is the dauber that I'm going to use. You can also use a small foam brush. You want to dab the paint on. You don't want to brush it on. You want to dab it on, and gently. The reason why we use a gentle dabbing motion is so that we don't overload our brush with paint or press too hard. That will cause bleeding through our stencil. So here I am just lightly tapping the paint on. If you're worried about coverage, you can always go back over your stencil with an additional coat. Just always remember to use a nice gentle dabbing or tapping motion. No brush strokes or hard pressing to fill in the gaps, because that will cause bleeding with your stencil. If you're worried about the gaps from the grooves in the lid of your bread box, you can always go back in later with a very fine point paintbrush and fill those in. You just want to double check your paint coverage just to make sure you got a good solid coat on, that it's the opaqueness that you want. And now we're going to remove the stencil while the paint is still wet. You can use your weeding tool or tweezers to help you lift up on the corner. The reason why we want to remove the stencil while the paint is still damp or wet is because using acrylic paint, which is food safe and is not going to leave a funky smell or taste onto your food, is because acrylic paint is flexible and it stretches. And if you wait until the paint is dry, you will tear your stencil lettering. Alright, so we have the stencil off, and now you can go ahead and discard your stencil. And then you're going to take your weeding tool or your tweezers and start removing the interior stencil pieces. keep your towel handy so that you can wipe off any paint that might get on your tweezers or weeding tool so that it doesn't transfer to your bread box. Alright, now that we have all those interior pieces out, we are going to do a little touch up with some white paint. You can see there's a few spots where my dauber got outside of my stencil, so I'm just going to take some white acrylic paint. And a skinny paintbrush. Just get a little bit of paint on the end of my bristles and cover up those dark spots. I'm also going to use this to fill in part of my A's because the little middle part did not transfer all the way. And like I said earlier, you can take this time if you don't like the look of it, if you prefer a more solid letter, you can use this time to fill in any of the grooves with a fine point paintbrush and black paint. I, however, am not going to do that. I prefer a more rustic look. And to add a little bit of additional distressing, I am taking a sanding block and just lightly sanding a few areas on the bread box. I will link below to the items I used to paint the bread box. I used a Martha Stewart vintage craft paint and the bread box I ordered off of Amazon. I will also include a link to my Etsy shop where you can purchase your own fresh baked goods stencil. You don't have to use it on a bread box. You can put it on a canvas, you can put it on a platter or a wooden sign. You don't have to put it on a bread box. It is single use, but it is a great decor piece. Thanks for visiting my channel, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.